Week 3, Lesson 5, Explosion of Superheroes. At the time, Action Comics number 1 seemed to be the biggest success that the comic publishing industry had seen, and that success was entirely attributed to Superman. It was a character unlike anything else at the time, and everyone wanted to profit off it. The problem was that Superman was owned by Detective Comics Incorporated, and not available for everyone to use. What we got was a huge wave of costume vigilantes. Starting with the original Superman ripoff in Wonder Comics. May 1939, Wonder Comics burst out into the stands, starring Wonder Man with his colorful costume. Fred Carson, a humble radio technician and inventor, was given a ring from a wizard. He became Wonder Man, defender of the weak and oppressed. He leaps tall buildings in single bound, he's more powerful than explosives, and his speed is undetermined. But, appearing less than a year after Action Comics number 1, it seems like he is probably the first Superman ripoff. So why didn't Detective Comics go to court? Because he only appeared in one issue. Wonder Comics was an anthology comic, and he didn't make the cut to issue number 2. It probably wouldn't matter if he did make the cut, as issue number 2 was the final issue in that comic book series. June 2nd, 1940, another masked vigilante entered the papers. Will Eisner's Spirit was a detective who was brought back from the dead who decided to, get this, fight crime. But, to let himself stand out from all the other detectives, he wore a domino mask. Will Eisner never wanted the character to have a mask, but the publishers wanted to jump on the bandwagon, so the Spirit had a domino mask, and that was his costume. However, unlike Superman, the Spirit didn't have a life outside his crime-fighting identity, and every time he was on the page, it was to investigate the crime. The Spirit is also one of those comics that gained a lot of recognition after it went out of print. Will Eisner became a huge name in the comic industry later on in his career, and he used the Spirit to experiment on artistic and narrative devices. There were stories where the Spirit was just a background character, and the story's focus was on random civilians in the city. There were stories where the entire strip was done from the point of view from a character's eyes, and all of the information we got as readers was what we saw through that person's eyes. The comics became noticeably worse when America entered World War II, but the early Spirit comics did a lot of techniques that weren't used until decades later. Keeping with the costume crime fighter theme, Detective Comics Incorporated introduced a well-known face in May 1939 on Detective Comics, the comic book. Detective Comics number 27 had a mysterious dark figure that was kind of dressed like a bat. We all know this character now is Batman, or the Caped Crusader, or the Dark Knight. This character was created by Bill Finger and Bob Kane. Unlike the Spirit, Wonder Man, and Superman, Batman did not have his origin mentioned in his first issue. A police commissioner named Gordon was talking to his young, rich friend, Bruce Wayne, telling him confidential information about a case. As Gordon tries to figure out what's happening, a mysterious Batman appears and starts helping out the police. When the final criminal is found out, Batman punches him into some acid and shows no remorse for the criminal's death. Commissioner Gordon tries to tell his friend Bruce Wayne what's happening, but Bruce doesn't seem interested. Little does Gordon know that his friend Bruce Wayne is really the Batman. That's the big reveal behind Batman's first appearance, that Batman and Bruce Wayne were the same person. Batman also showed that costume fighters could be very successful without superpowers. Shortly after his first year, he was teamed up with the most famous sidekick in comics, Robin, a kid who helped Batman fight crime. Batman had a darker tone than many other superhero comics, but once Robin joined the series, the book started to become noticeably lighter in its atmosphere. We're going to take a much more detailed look at Batman later in this course, but for now, what's important is that Batman was a logical transition from detective characters to the costumed crime-fighting vigilante characters. he was also the most successful hero who appeared right after Superman. Along with Batman, DC Comics also released a group of superheroes known as the Justice Society of America, or JSA for short. The Justice Society is a group of rich white men who created this group that would meet to discuss how to fight crime. The team's adventures were written in all-star comics, and some very influential and long-lasting characters first appeared in their pages. The Atom, Hawkman, the Flash, Green Lantern, the Spectre, Wildcat, and some lesser-known characters like Johnny Thunder and Starman all appeared in this group. After 8 issues, Wonder Woman appeared. Later, she joined as a group secretary, and eventually became the most famous character on the team. The team had a revolving cast, with only Hawkman appearing in every issue. Near the end of the comic's run, Superman and Batman joined the team as honorary members, but only made a few appearances. In 1939, with the success of Superman, Timely Comics was founded and showcased their heroes in a book called Marvel Mysteries. Among the heroes showcased were the Human Torch and Namor. The Human Torch was an android who would burst into flames whenever his skin touched oxygen. The heat in his flames allowed his body to be lifted off the ground, and he was able to fly. He was also able to control his flames to a certain point, and he'd be able to fire his flames at his enemies. Unlike many other heroes at the time, the Human Torch was feared more by civilians than he was respected. This is one of the first examples of this type of hero, which Stan Lee would make famous a few decades later. The Human Torch, like Batman, quickly got a young sidekick named Toro, who had all the same powers he did. Namor was a half-human, half-Atlantean hybrid. He was incredibly strong and could breathe underwater. He would fight fishermen and criminals who came too close to his realm, and he was a jerk to almost everyone he met. He also had wings on his ankles, which allowed him to fly. Those wings didn't come from his Atlantean or human side. They were a mutation, making Namor the first mutant in comics. Namor's name was just Roman, spelt backwards, and he was supposed to have an imperialist Roman attitude, which clearly wasn't supposed to be imitated by children. Namor's attitude, alien morals, and unconventional way of dealing with villains probably made him comics' first anti-hero. In issue number 8 of Marvel Mystery Comics, the Human Torch and Namor ran across each other and got into an epic fight. This is probably the first hero versus hero fight that has happened in comics, a trope that would become cliched as the genre evolved. Timely Comics' success with the superhero genre made them one of the companies that would compete with DC Comics through World War II and the 1950s. The company changed its name to Atlas Comics and eventually became Marvel Comics, which is today the largest comic book publisher in America. The other superhero from this time that's really worth mentioning is Captain Marvel. First appearing in February 1940 by the publisher Fawcett Comics in their series Whiz Comics issue number 2. Captain Marvel was a kid who was lured into an abandoned subway tunnel by a mysterious stranger. It turned out that that stranger was a wizard, and by saying the wizard's name, the kid could turn into an adult superhero and then turn back into a kid when he was done fighting crime. That kid was Billy Batson, and he said the magic word, Shazam! Standing for King Solomon, Hercules, Atlas, Zeus, Achilles, and Mercury. He had Solomon's wisdom, Hercules' strength, Atlas' stamina, Zeus's power, Achilles' courage, and Mercury's speed. So what we had was a hero whose powers were almost identical to Superman's. Children loved Captain Marvel, and although we don't have the statistics, I think some adults also enjoyed the comic because it had a surreal feel to it. Like Superman, Captain Marvel fought a mad scientist, but he also fought an angry caterpillar as a recurring villain. Captain Marvel teamed up with a civilized tiger who could talk and was quite polite. He also had a supporting cast who had similar powers to him. His cast became known as the Marvel family. There was Uncle Marvel, the older, fatter Marvel who would try and help but mess things up. There was Mary Marvel, Billy Batson's long-lost sister, who gained the same powers he did when she said the word Shazam. There was Captain Marvel Jr., who got his powers whenever he said the name of his hero, Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel Jr. was one of the inspirations for Elvis Presley's stage persona. It turned out that Elvis Presley was a fan of comics. Captain Marvel was so popular that the series started outselling Superman. This made DC Comics nervous, so they kept threatening to take Fawcett Comics to court over the similarities, and then they kept settling. Fawcett Comics couldn't afford the lawsuits and gave into the pressure to stop writing Captain Marvel books, which was a huge blow to their company that it never recovered from. In 1953, Fawcett Comics finally closed down. So, why is Captain Marvel important in the history of comics? Because he showed that readers love the concept of superheroes more than the individual character of Superman, and he showed that if writers targeted a younger crowd, they'd increase sales. The cultural influence of this comic is still felt through the work of Elvis Presley.